What's up, guys? Welcome back to Roensch Capital Charts. Today we're taking a look at Nvidia, ticker symbol NVDA, on a variety of time frames in anticipation of tomorrow's trading day, Tuesday, February 6th. Well, Nvidia here today, yet again, cannot be stopped, up 31 points, nearly 32 points a share, 4.79%. And you can see here, we are up now an additional over 1% in the after hours, breaking through $700 a share as we speak here Monday night. Okay, now, first of all, really we have to consider, I know I hate to say it, but breaking $700 a share, we have to take after hours movement, as always, even if it confirms our bias. We have to take after hours movement with a grain of salt when volume is low, like it is here today. And listen here, the only time volume isn't that low is really on an earnings day. Like on Palantir stock today, we saw an absurd amount of volume on the earnings that actually exceeded the volume on the opening bell. Even that's uncommon. On any normal day, even though Nvidia is hitting an all-time high here today, hitting an all-time high in the after hours, volume's going to be substantially lower than it is once we get that full opinion, that full sample size, like during regular trading hours. So we have to take it with a grain of salt. But as always, if you're a bull and the stock's going up after hours, pushing further into all-time highs, breaking another $100 round number like 700, you know, you'd obviously rather have that than the alternative. Let's take a quick look here at the 1 minute chart. I just want to look off in the morning. You can see here, we're seeing these rejections off of volume weighted average price, the 2 standard deviation band from the volume weighted average price there. You can see, I'm sure a couple of scalpers decided to take that trade there. We went down and it looked like I was watching this. We were going to form a setup to the long side. We never actually formed it. It was way too sloppy. So not a lot intraday as far as scalps are concerned on Nvidia. Completely unrelated to the company, by the way, just the stock movement on this particular day. If you guys would like to get my personal intraday scalp setup alerts as well as swing trade setup alerts, unusual options activity that I human verify every single day, by the way, maybe even platinum one-on-one, that link is in the pinned comment. Let's now look at the 5 minute chart and take a look at volume as it relates to the different moves we saw today. Now, if we look at the volume here, we can see we have somewhat representative of that U shape that we've come to expect on a lot of the blue chip names, right? But what we're really looking for is any obvious volume spikes or dumps on up moves in the stock or downside moves in the stock. You can see here, like, okay, here's an obvious downside move in the stock, a little fade, you know, about half an hour into the market being open. We saw volume hang on to what we saw after the opening bell. You know, but really not a whole heck of a lot of substantial increases. Okay, and then once we started making that upside return, yeah, volume faded off, but not to be unexpected after the market has already been open and we're entering that almost lunch period in New York already. We got some midday consolidation here, right? Pretty average volume. We got a little upside move, a little uptick on the downside move. As far as volume is concerned here on the 5 minute, you know, not a lot we can really take away from that, at least in my opinion. The reason we're looking at this to begin with, guys, is again, when a stock is moving upside, if you're bullish, you want to see that happening on any time frame, really, on as much volume as possible. The opposite is true, of course, if you're bearish. You want to see upside moves happen on as little volume as possible and then dump offs on big, huge volume if you're a bear. Okay, let's move on now to the 30 minute. And you can see here that really what we're looking at on this chart in particular, going to be the 200 period. Of course, crossing over that 630 area that we have drawn, and the 50 period currently sitting at 678 approximately. Okay, so consider that, including the after hours movement here, sitting right around 702, that's approximately a 3.4% downside move just to make a test of that 50 period. So ideally, if you're a bull looking at this 30 minute chart, you're going to want to see that 50 period moving average get sucked up as close to 700 as possible, as quickly as possible. Get a potential safety net, get some feet up under the stock as soon as possible. A psychological safety net, right? Something for people to look at. And if you're bearish, aside from breaking downside off 700, ideally looking at the 30 minute, you'd want to see a break downside back beneath that 50 period here on the 30 minute specifically. All right, let's take a look at the 4 hour. This one, you know, we're going to see This 50 period, especially the 200 period, that's not even immediately relevant. The 50 period, it's going to take its time. Nvidia has been on an absolute tear, and these are lagging indicators. They take their time to catch up to the stock, especially when it's making moves like Nvidia has been. Okay, so, you know, with that nearest level down around 626, 627, honestly, in a time like this, you know, I'm going to keep an eye on the 4 hour to see if anything develops. But you know what? Nothing immediately relevant here on the 4 hour, okay? And sometimes that happens, and that's okay, especially when you're, you know, punching through to all-time high territory like this. Just nothing has developed yet to watch. We'd be making something up, right? We'd be forcing it. We don't want to do that. We always want everything we're looking at to be so obvious psychologically to any and all traders and institutions that it becomes that self-fulfilling prophecy that we're always looking for, okay? Zoom out to arguably the most important chart, the daily, and talk about some levels here. Of course, we have earnings coming up here on Nvidia, February 21st, after the market closes. But listen here, this is the time to talk about this now. The stock's at all-time highs, okay? There are no technical areas to watch. They haven't developed yet. The only areas to watch are psychological areas, and we are currently at one. This is the daily chart. It does not show after-hours movement. The stock right now is actually just above $700 a share. Tomorrow, if you're a bull, one thing is on your mind. Hold 700 as a new potential area of support, or, you know, ideally, really, just start to develop it as such. Typically, it's going to take longer than 1 day to claim that. And if we see a little bit of a pullback, listen, that's okay. This thing has been on an absolute tear, but looking ahead through this week, and ideally as soon as possible, just develop that $700 area as a potential hangout spot, a little safety net, a little support region that we can build on. Even if the stock goes sideways for days, I don't care. We need to show comfort up in this new range and start to develop kind of that, or I guess redevelop that stair-step style chart here on the daily chart. You know, if you never stop to smell the roses, if you never stop to take a breather, well, it gets really hard to show comfort up in these new regions if the stock is just going parabolic. Then you're playing a game of rug pull with newer buyers. We don't want that, right? We want the stock to slow down, show a little bit of comfort, trade sideways for, you know, it doesn't have to take months, of course. It doesn't even have to take weeks necessarily. Just form new levels, and then we can look at making our way up toward that $750 region, $800 region, okay? Not to say the stock won't continue to just rip from here, but I'm just saying from a health perspective, if you're looking at this from a more mid-longer term outlook, we got to start showing some health here. You can see we did the same thing right around $600 a share. This is a great example, okay? Right in here. See how we did that? Right in there, okay? We showed some consolidation, got healthy, ripped our way right up to $700 a share. Stocks need that, okay? Especially stocks with this big of a market cap. Now, if you are bearish on Nvidia, first of all, I apologize for the recent movement. But if you're bearish, one thing's on your mind. Do not allow 700 to be claimed as support. And bulls, this is what you would not be looking for, of course. I think bears, if 700 gets claimed as a support, to a lot of your peers, that's going to be seen as discouraging. And to a lot of your enemies, the bulls, that's going to be seen as highly encouraging. The opposite is true for breaking downside and fading hard off of 700. The bulls aren't going to necessarily be encouraged by that movement, right? And a lot of bears are going to see that as a sign. You know, we're rejecting hard off 700. Time to get bigger, or time to enter, okay? Not that necessarily would be, you know, such an obvious trade. Not at all. Trades are almost never obvious in nature, but we're talking about psychology, okay? And you bears, a hard fade off of $700 a share, that psychological level, it's going to be encouraging to a lot of your peers, okay? You want to discourage the bulls as much as possible. That's how you would do it. Look to head back down toward that 650, 630 range, and bulls, just hold 7. Build a nice base, and then look to rip up towards 750 or 800 eventually. after getting healthy. Okay. Now, something we do need to talk about here is implied volatility. You can see it's going up. All right. The higher this goes, relevant to the intended trade time frame, whatever your intended trade time frame may be, the higher the potential risk for IV crush. Just understand that if we end up seeing an IV fade back down toward equilibrium, that would negatively impact at least one factor through one Greek, that Greek is Vega, the value of your contracts. Okay, let's take a look at those contracts here today. What are traders thinking as Nvidia continues to push to all-time highs? This is absurd. This is the first time I'm looking here at Nvidia's chain today. 1.89 million total contracts traded today. Beautiful sample size. We can get a lot of good data out of that. 1.25 million of those were calls. 636,000 of those were puts. We are seeing approximately double the calls compared to puts here today. Overall call per ratio leaning heavily bullish. Short-term speculation, that's 0 to 20 delta, 455,000 calls, 324,000 puts. You know, not quite leaning as ridiculously to the bullish side, but those short-term speculators still leaning bullish. Even more ridiculous here, those mid to long-term players, a lot of leaps contracts participants over here, 61 to 80 delta range and 81 to 100 delta range. We're seeing 150,000 calls collectively between those two and only 20,000 puts. 150,000 versus 20. This chain is leaning heavily to the bullish side. That doesn't mean they're necessarily going to be correct all the time, right? The masses, the options traders, they can be wrong. Make sure your risk is managed, as always. But that's what they're telling us here today. Listen, before you head out, let me know what stocks you'd like me to cover here on the channel in the future, even if it is just more Nvidia. That feedback does help out tremendously. And I'll see you in the next one.